Hello there. A lot has happened in Obi-Wan Kenobi Part 3, so let's get right into it with how this new piece of the story fixes old problems and raises new ones. Spoilers for everything up to Kenobi Part 3. Now, I'm going to go over the bad, the good, and of course that big dramatic fight from the end. So, let's start with the bad. It's definitely a nitpick, which is why I'm getting this out of the way first, but why does Disney keep doing this? Using super normal human voices for extremely alien characters.
Hi, I'm Luma.
Hey there, I'm Freck. That's a weird story. Well, I'm going that way. Jump in. My pleasure. Hop in.
It's so jarring and unbelievable to me. Maybe it flies in Star Trek, but this sort of thing just doesn't work in Star Wars. And the few times that Star Wars has tried this, it instantly creates really cringeworthy characters that people don't really like. Also, this guy's mouth doesn't move to match his words at all. So he ends up coming across looking kind of like Pumbaa the Warthog rather than being some unique alien species that's realistic. Well, at least for the first few scenes he's in. Although I admit he did grow on me and he started to seem more normal by the end of the episode. But on a more serious note, some people online have said that Darth Vader's entrance was too brutal in Kenobi Part 3, because he goes around the town randomly killing civilians. But I thought that was a fitting moment for the character. He's been looking for Obi-Wan as enemy number 1 for the past 10 years, and it's pretty well established in Star Wars that a common technique used for hunting Jedi is to attack innocent people until the Jedi comes out to defend them. Is it a great tactic? Not really. But it's one that's used often in Star Wars, and it makes sense for Vader to try it here. Remember, this isn't original trilogy Vader, this is Revenge of the Sith Rogue One Vader. He doesn't mess around. He's angry, he's intense, and he's brutal. Although, there was one early Vader scene that was so great in concept, but so poorly executed, at least in my opinion. I'm talking here about Obi-Wan seeing the vision of Anakin from Revenge of the Sith. That's a brilliant idea and perfectly combines all the strengths of the show. It is a quiet character moment, it shows Obi-Wan's pain, it's an emotionally strong moment, and it uses the returns of Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen to their full potential. At least in theory. Except that in this episode, for whatever reason, the scene is so short and Anakin is so tiny and far away from the camera that you can't even really see his face. Can you imagine a close-up shot of Hayden returned to his role as Anakin haunting Obi-Wan? That could have become one of the most iconic scenes in Star Wars history. But instead we get a super distant Anakin who we can barely distinguish by his Jedi robes. He stands there for a few seconds and then he's gone. From just a first glance, it's hard to even tell that Anakin is Hayden Christensen. I know they were going for a found footage haunted movie kind of vibe for this, and it seems like a lot of other people loved it. But it didn't really work for me in the way that they filmed it, at least not as much as it should have. And we're spending a lot of time in the sand here on a poor remote planet that's not Tatooine for a Kenobi show, aren't we? It is too bad that the show doesn't include more about Luke, Owen, Beru, life on Tatooine, but the story about saving Leia is actually really good too, in my opinion. Which makes me actually wish that the show was longer, so we could get both stories, or maybe even some others. Overall, though, I thought the start of this episode was pretty strong. There weren't actually many noticeable issues in the first half, and that's something pretty rare. But on the other hand, Kenobi has some problems still with acting, pacing, and story through its first 3 episodes. And the biggest issues always come down to maintaining and building on the lore. Something we can't fully judge until the entire series has released.
Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Apparently not. I say patience.
Patience.
Yes.
So for now, let's take a moment to appreciate the great things from Kenobi Part 3. Vader's castle, Mustafar, and Vader himself were all amazing and epic. There was nothing new or surprising there, but it's good to see these classics come back without any problems. Also, Obi-Wan and Leia's interactions are always great and wholesome.
What about you? You have any information about a Jedi?
I would know one if I saw one.
Are you sure he's even on this planet?
They know what they're doing, Leia.
You called her Leia. I thought her name was Luma.
That was her mother's name. I get confused. Like I said, it's not been easy. Sometimes when I look at Luma, I see her mother's face. We all miss her very much.
Obi-Wan remembering Padme and bonding with Leia is one of the most wholesome emotional aspects of the show, and it's really good that they continue it. The scene of the alien junker being an Imperial supporter and the stormtroopers just going about their daily missions were also two really cool things to see. This is something Star Wars always needs more of. That subtle, realistic, day-to-day life of people in the galaxy just living. It adds a lot of depth and drama and makes the universe feel lived in. Speaking of which, the internal drama between Inquisitors was really intense and great because it totally makes sense and it gives them a lot more character than they would get in the later seasons of the Rebels show. Anything that adds to Rebels is fine by me, although I'm still worried about what's going on with that Grand Inquisitor in this show. Then, at the end, that chase between Vader and Obi-Wan was actually surprisingly well done. Going in, I was so worried that they would just make the Kenobi versus Vader reimagined sort of fight, with lots of ridiculous moves, excessive unneeded CGI, and unrealistic fighting that doesn't match the emotions well at all. But this fight, the lightsabers, costumes, and the environment all looked perfect. The fight looked real, with well-controlled weight behind the lightsabers and actual intensity. It was the exact sort of duel I would imagine Obi-Wan and Vader having at that period in time, so that was super exciting to see. As someone who personally doesn't mind them coming into contact or even fighting before A New Hope, I'm glad that we got to see them clash in such a well-choreographed, impactful way, even if it did come pretty early in the series without much build-up. More on that later, and especially a lot more about the problems of that later. But now that I've said what's good in the fight, we need to talk about the problems. And the problem is the ending. Vader won? What? That doesn't make any sense at all, and it's by far the biggest problem in this episode. It's well established in A New Hope that the last time they met, Vader saw himself as the learner and Obi-Wan as the master.
I've been waiting for you, Obi-Wan. We meet again at last. The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, Darth.
Originally, this meant Anakin was the apprentice of Obi-Wan, who literally was his master. But I thought in this show they would take a tact so that Obi-Wan is the master of the Force and Vader's a learner in the sense that Obi-Wan would defeat him using some method that Vader doesn't yet understand. You know, kind of like Revenge of the Sith. And honestly, that would have made sense and it would have been great. Hi guys, Deep Dive in Editing here. Just wanted to make it clear that I understand they'll probably have another Kenobi versus Vader fight in the last episode of the series where Obi-Wan does recover and win. But I still feel like Vader's victory here was way too decisive for what it should be. Maybe they should have had like a tie for the first battle. You know, like Qui-Gon Jinn versus Darth Maul on Tatooine, with Obi-Wan choosing to escape so that he can help Leia. You know, something that keeps Obi-Wan's status as a little higher than Vader's, and still has a good fight, but gives Vader that motivation to keep improving. Something that increases the payoff in A New Hope rather than nullifying it. Who knows? Maybe my kind of prediction will be more like what the final showdown ends up being. But right now my impression is that the first fight should have ended as a stalemate with Obi-Wan running away. And that the second fight, whenever that happens, should be a final duel with Obi-Wan winning pretty decisively. But anyway, back to my first thoughts and talking about a good way that I thought this fight, or at least the final fight, could go connect to A New Hope a little bit better. By A New Hope, Obi-Wan does know that Anakin became Vader and that he's become more machine than man, something he doesn't know yet in Revenge of the Sith, so it would have been a perfect opportunity to show all these moments come together in one big fight. To give you an example of what I mean, here's how I would have handled it. Vader hunts down Obi-Wan, meets him on the planet, and the duel begins exactly the same as in the show. But then, as Obi-Wan keeps running away over and over, Vader gets more and more frustrated, swinging wildly, throwing objects with the Force, and generally losing his edge as his anger boils over. Vader eventually gets lucky and manages to back Obi-Wan into a corner, forcing Obi-Wan to take a stand. Seeing Leia make her escape in the distance, Obi-Wan says, "Don't do this, Anakin. Step aside now." and he makes the same opening pose he does in A New Hope and waits for Vader to strike. Vader replies that Anakin Skywalker is dead and you killed him. And then Vader attacks. With the Force theme playing in the background, Vader takes strike after strike at Obi-Wan, who blocks them all with ease. As Vader gets more upset, he gets more and more aggressive, swinging wildly at Obi-Wan, but none break through. Obi-Wan parries each attack, and eventually deflects to make cuts on both of Vader's arms and one of his legs, revealing the new robotics within. Obi-Wan debates killing Vader for a moment, having him knocked down and defeated, maybe Obi-Wan force pushing his lightsaber away. But then Obi-Wan sees Leia in the distance and runs after her before she gets out of sight. Vader is left alone on the ground, defeated in a rage until the Inquisitors come to gather him. That's the sort of conflict I was expecting. That's the sort of conflict that would have been best to see, in my opinion, and explained the most while also connecting things to A New Hope. Now, don't get me wrong, the lightsaber duel itself in the real show was really, really well done. Everything looked right, all the moves were realistic, and the theme was definitely there. Vader is trying to defeat Obi-Wan, specifically in a way that makes him feel better about losing the previous duel, while Obi-Wan is trying to lure Vader away from Leia, but also escape, but also get a feel for exactly what Anakin has become. In the real Kenobi show, all the pieces were there for a perfect fight, and I'd go so far as to say that the first half of the fight was basically perfect. But then we get to the second half. The second half of the Kenobi-Vader duel in the real Kenobi show was not nearly what it could have been. The first issue is Vader choking Kenobi. If Vader can choke Obi-Wan so easily here, why didn't he just do that in Revenge of the Sith? It worked for Count Dooku pretty well, right? Or if he wasn't strong enough yet, then why didn't he just do it later in A New Hope? Vader trying to choke and force lift Obi-Wan made perfect sense. But Vader succeeding at it that effectively, not so much. He basically ragdolls Obi-Wan to the ground, sets a fire, and then drags Obi-Wan through it. The weirdest part of this was that I didn't understand what was physically happening at the end. Disney obviously can't burn Obi-Wan here, because he isn't burned at all in A New Hope. But it seems that Vader's goal was to give Kenobi the Mustafar experience for revenge. So why wouldn't he just throw him in the fire? I guess he did throw him in the fire, but basically, Vader lights the fire, throws Obi-Wan onto it, and then the flames kind of magically disappear as Obi-Wan gets dragged through them, and he gets no more serious injury than it being really, really hot. I suppose you could say Vader was toying with him somehow, or moving the fire with the Force, or maybe Obi-Wan put out the flames as he was rolled through it, but it's just not a great solution to the story, and it kind of took me out of the show. Then Obi-Wan is just left there sort of half burning in the fire for a while a bunch of stormtroopers come to shoot at him and he has no way of escape. No way at all. By this point, Vader has definitely, unequivocally, 100% won the battle. Even more than Obi-Wan had back in Revenge of the Sith, which, for all the reasons I've already mentioned, doesn't work at all, and it doesn't make any sense with their dialogue in A New Hope. That whole "I was the learner, now I am the master" line has a lot less impact and makes a lot less sense if Vader has already literally tossed Obi-Wan around with ease and casually thrown him into a fire pit before. The more I think about it, the worse it gets. Things were so good at the beginning and then they just got dropped so badly. But oh well, the show still has good and bad. It's Star Wars after all. Oh, and I forgot to mention, that loading droid was so cool, so there is that. This series isn't a perfect or even necessarily a great Star Wars story, but it's enough of a mixed bag that I think it's still worth watching and worth discussing more. And of course, there are more episodes coming out soon, so things might change. As always, here's to hoping that the future episodes manage to maximize the good while dropping some of the bad. Or maybe some fan edit will help in the future. Who knows? Anyway, my other reviews of the Kenobi series and other Star Wars analysis are on screen now if you want to click one of those, but otherwise, until next time, this is Deep Dive, signing off.